Over the course of this decade and into the next, we will be moving into a world that, in terms of the distribution of power, is new. And that for the last 70, 80 years, we've been living in a world in which the democracies of the world have anchored the international system, have represented the lion's share of global GDP. That's not going to be the case anymore. China will have the largest economy in the world by the end of the decade. So we're heading into something that is a mix of bipolarity, two big major players, China and the United States, and multipolarity, where the EU, Russia, India, others are middle tier powers, sometimes leaning toward China, sometimes leaning toward the US. But I do think that we have to think about the world as headed in a direction that will be much more fluid, multipolar, flexible, more difficult to manage than we are used to. The second point, I don't think there'll be any immediate shifts in China policy if Biden is elected, in the sense that there are underlying conflicts of interests over trade, human rights, security, cyber, lots of other issues in play, and they're just not going to go away. I do expect there to be some shifts in Biden's stance, and they would include, number one, that instead of picking a trade fight with everybody, I think he would tend to try to build a united coalition to stand up to China, to level the playing field, working with the Europeans, Canada, Mexico, Japan, South Korea, rather than just creating chaos on all trade fronts. Secondly, I think there will be a restart of a strategic dialogue, a real effort to engage China. That has basically come to an end during the Trump administration. And third, I think there will be a China policy, which there isn't today. There really isn't foreign policy on any front. We have policy by tweet, in which the president says something and everybody scrambles to figure out what he means. That will change. I think you'll see a much more rationalized process. Now, does that mean that the relationship will get better? Who knows? The third point, I do think that there will be an opening to push the relationship in a more measured direction, because it's been on a very bad trajectory over the last year and a half, in which people are talking about a new Cold War. I don't see that happening. There will be no decoupling. We're not going to go back to a bipolar world that looks like the Cold War. There's no way that we're going to see two independent spheres. The US, China, and everyone else, we are too tethered together on trade and investment. Yeah, maybe some reallocation of supply lines on high tech, but nothing that would constitute the fragmentation of the world that we saw during the Cold War. But I do think that, especially given the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, given the degree to which Biden will be focused like a laser on the home front, taming the pandemic, getting the economy going, trying to repair a divided country, he will not be that interested in picking big fights anywhere in the world. And if I were advising the Chinese government, I would advise it to look at this as an opportunity to start a more constructive dialogue with the United States on a number of fronts, given the domestic environment here, the degree to which retrenchment and pullback is on the agenda. I think the Chinese would find a willing conversation partner. Final point, things to keep an eye on that I think will be interesting to see. It would be, number one, do we begin to see the main alliance partners in the United States begin to tilt more toward China? And by that I mean Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, in part because they've become concerned about the reliability of the United States. We, to the outside world, look like a political mess, in part because we are a political mess. And two, because as China gets more powerful in its region, will countries feel that they need to spend more time engaging China even if to some extent that means loosening the tie to the United States. The other thing to keep an eye on is where Europe will be as the US-China relationship evolves. I think this will be an issue where there are difficulties of management. Will the EU sometimes side with China on trade issues? Yes. Will it sometimes side with the US? Yes. And in general, I think the relationship between Europe and Russia and between Europe and China will be two of the issues that will require a lot of transatlantic management. I expect to see tensions on these issues, especially after Merkel leaves office, where I think that will make it difficult to maintain the sanctions regime on Russia. Nord Stream 2 is still a tough issue. And I'm expecting that on China as well, there may well be differences of opinion between Europeans and Americans.